Ayan na mga kameta, kamusta kayo dyan? Mabilisan lang pag-usapan natin itong isang issue na kailangan natin balikan. Katulad ng pangako natin na last week, dapat pag-usapan natin itong West Philippine Sea issue, pag-usapan natin yung growing alliance between the Philippines and Vietnam or emerging alliance between Philippines and Vietnam. May sinulat tayo ukol dyan last week na it's gaining traction, it's getting a lot of reaction. Dahil nga, I think there's a lot to Philippines and Vietnam than meets the eye, and definitely the Philippines can do far better dun sa nangyari sa panahon ni President Duterte, who mostly focused on China and to a certain degree Russia, but parang na-neglect niya, no? Yung shared interest natin with countries like Vietnam. If anything, yung mga pro-tatay pa naman dyan na iba, na alam natin saan sila natutuwa, ay marami pa naman dyan nagiging anti-Vietnam. But before talking about that, mga kameta, itong issue ng Vietnam, Philippines, and China, triangular dynamics, pag-usapan natin ng konti itong um, implications ng, mm, well, let's just call it a kerfuffle, no? Na nangyari last week pagdating sa domestic politics. And this is where we clearly see, mga kameta, a strong connection between domestic politics and international politics. Now, katulad ng pinag-usapan natin the other week, mga kameta, at least President Arroyo or former President Arroyo and now Deputy Speaker of the House, no longer the senior Deputy Speaker of the House, was saying that her supposed demotion had perhaps something to do with rumors or baseless allegations that she was angling for the top job in the lower house anew, no? So yun po yung konteksto daw ng kanyang demotion. Of course, she denied it and she repeatedly emphasized that, she's there to help the president. President Marcos Jr. also sinabi niya na secret weapon niya ever since si President Arroyo, that he has a lot of respect for her. Then nakita naman natin si Martin Romualdez, yung ating Speaker of the House, also went to her, nagmano po, and supposedly nagkaroon ng makeup and all of that. Now, having said that, mga kameta, upon further review of the issue, mukhang lumalabas dito is that there is an aspect of foreign policy disagreement potentially here, no? Because alam natin si President Arroyo has very strong views on the necessity of making sure na ang Pilipinas po ay hindi masyadong maging confrontational sa China at yung kahalagaan ng maintaining robust communication channels with China. Now, alam natin na si former President Arroyo, actually kasama niya si President Marcos during the important visit to China, state visit to China earlier this year, and the working visit to the United States also earlier this month naman, mga kameta. Of course, state visit sa China, medyo next level yun. At doon talaga nakita natin na openly sinabi ng ating Pangulo na tingin niya kay President Arroyo is a secret weapon because of yung kanyang experience o kanyang karanasan in dealing with superpowers among others. Now, what's coming out, mga kameta, base dun sa mga iba't ibang analysis from different quarters. So, for instance, if you look at this interesting article by Manolo Quezon, my colleague in Inquirer, he talked about, for instance, the tendency of, or the alleged tendency of former President Arroyo to be quite open, no? Quite open dun sa kanyang displeasure, no, with the direction of our foreign policy pagdating sa yung ating lumalakas na relasyon, no, sa China, relasyon sa Amerika, at how that can potentially, put the Philippines in a much more difficult spot when it comes to dealing with China, or could potentially provoke China, no? So yun yung argument ni Manolo Quezon. Just to read what Manolo Quezon was saying, I mean, as columnists, we all have our own opinion, but there are times that, when it comes to especially tactical analysis and detailed analysis, let's call it eventmentiel analysis, I think Manolo Quezon has a lot to offer in terms of analytic acumen, no, in fairness naman sa kanya, no? Despite some of the disagreement I may have with him on the bigger strategic questions, but, big strategy is what I do. Going back to this, mga kameta. Oh, by the way, mamaya natin pag-usapan yung conversation ko with Henry Kissinger, by the way. I was supposed to post something about it nung over the weekend. Of course, it was a 100th birthday ni Henry Kissinger, but I just felt better na I'll just write a whole article or column about it kasi very polarizing itong issue na ito. So, pag-usapan natin bukas na lang itong issue na to. Anyway, no, I'm just saying why I say, I do big, mega strategic thinking because yung mga ganito ang mga kausap natin, mga ganyan. Okay, anyway, going back to this, mga kameta, so ito yung sinasabi ni So one of the interesting things that actually happened dun sa pagbisita ni Pangulong Marcos sa US was that there was this important picture na kung saan nandun yung mga top officials ng Pilipinas. At ayon sa kanya, this picture was very telling, no? Because dito sa picture na yan, dun sa White House, ito yung arrangement po na nangyari, no? Which somehow violated the protocol, no? So flanking Mr. Marcos ayon kay Manolo is Speaker Ferdinand Marcos Romualdez to his left, and then Senior Deputy Speaker Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo to the right. Even though as his deputy, as a number 2 in the lower house, dapat doon pa siya, di ba? Following protocol. To Arroyo's right was Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo, who outranks her, somehow at least on foreign policy issues, some would say. And to the speaker's left was Jose Manuel Romualdez, who was, of course, our ambassador to the United States. Now, what caused a double take from seasoned observers ayon kay Manolo Quezon was that the correct positioning would have been to have Ambassador Romualdez seated beside the president, since he's the chief executive alter ego in the United States, and then Manalo beside the ambassador, no? And yet, so nakita natin dito na ang taas ng regard or literally yung position na binibigay kay Arroyo, at least dun sa mga big pictures, no? Ayon kay Manolo Quezon, the speaker for his part ought to have been on the other side of the president, and then Arroyo, okay. As a former president, ayon sa kanya, Arroyo might be entitled to some courtesies, but as a sitting congresswoman, her current position trumps her previous distinctions, particularly during working visits abroad. Underreported by the media, in which the administration managed to keep a tight rein, ayon sa kanya, was Arroyo's yung kanyang tendency daw to venture opinions during the Washington meetings, and almost just as, ayon sa kanya, medyo, to insist on attending meetings na her presence was neither asked for or... So, ayon dito, may mga current diplomacy nangyari to a certain degree or so. So, parang yun ang sinasabi dito. Now, what other analysts are arguing, mga kameta, is that there was also an aspect of China, U.S. here, no? There's also an aspect of President Arroyo having very strong views on us not being too reliant on China, and accordingly, her discomfort and expressed discomfort, no, with what's happening pagdating sa policy natin sa United States, which is tightening our military cooperation with her, no. So actually, there was another interesting article the other day kung saan, different analysts were looking at how yung Marcos pivot to US, pivot back to the US, is creating internal political rifts, and that this whole Speaker of the House, Deputy Speaker of the House episode was somehow a reflection of that, no? Now, this is very interesting because, Kameta, more than a decade ago, no, noong 2012, nakita din natin how the West Philippine Sea issue could be extremely divisive sa Pilipinas. Kung maalala niyo yung episode na kung saan halos halos nagsigawan yata or nag-aaway talaga openly si Enrile, then Senate President Juan Ponce Enrile, at versus si Trillanes, no? Because of their disagreement doon sa Scarborough Shoal crisis. Now, some are saying that etong friendliness ni Marcos sa US at yung potential provocation of China as a result, ang result nito is nagkakaroon ng hiduan din domestically. So this is a very interesting angle that I think has not been explored as much. But as I say, this is not unique. We also saw this back during the Scarborough Shoal era pa lang, na how divisive can the West Philippine Sea issue become. Not to mention, of course, during the President Duterte's term, back then medyo quiet si Bongbong Marcos, but we had an extremely polarized national discussion ukol sa foreign policy ni Duterte. What was interesting, although during the time of Duterte, is that yung mga supporters din niya hindi masyado sangayon sa kanya dun sa kanyang China policy. So that created some weird situation whereby the president has a 70-80% approval rating in generic terms, but 90% or so are against him when it comes to his China West Philippine Sea policy, base din sa mga surveys na tinitignan natin. So a lot of people just say the president is popular. Well, they were looking at generic numbers, but they could see some key issues like China West Philippine Sea. The president was actually well outside the national consensus. I mean, by far, you're looking at 90% of Filipinos over and over saying different SW survey and Pulse Asia survey Pulse Asia, remember, we're quoting Pulse Asia that shows na hindi sang-ayon ng mga taong bayan kay Pangulong Duterte dun sa West Philippine Sea issue. You can look at those things yourself. All the numbers are out there. Just type SWS or Pulse Asia, West Philippine Sea survey. Kitang-kita natin na President Duterte was a minority on these issues. And that really constrained this option, and that made it very difficult for the president to go ahead and get rid of VFA or completely get rid of EDCA. Forget about getting rid of the MDT or calling for a official, really systematic review of that. No, so we can see how the West Philippine Sea issue and the China-US issue is having ripple effects, including exposing fault lines and divisions in the domestic Philippine politics. I think that's very, very interesting thing to keep in mind, mga kameta. No, I think definitely, this is something that we should continue to watch out for in the coming days and the coming weeks and the coming months, no? As President Marcos Jr. tries to navigate this very, very difficult issue, no? For that matter. By the way, may mga tanong kayo because I'm thinking, wait lang, para masyadong magulo if I bring also the Vietnam issue here. Now, I mean, President Arroyo, in fairness naman sa kanya, when she was in power back then, at least early on in her early years, she was essentially trying to move on multiple fronts simultaneously. No, if you look at President Arroyo, maybe let's just do a different vlog na lang on the Philippine and Vietnam because I think this is quite a complex issue that we have to spend a lot of time on. Now, again, let me put the Arroyo foreign policy into perspective. And by the way, ito yung interview namin ni parang chubby ko nandito sa picture na yan. This was 2019. Anyways, I'll post the link dun sa interview namin so you can listen to the interview yourself. Right. Okay. No, my point kasi is when it comes to President Arroyo, at least ito lang picture para hindi ka nang katsaka. So, feel free to check this interview with President Arroyo. I interviewed her nung Kapuso pa tayo, no? So for GMA Network. So you can feel free to check this out. So, mga kameta, when I talk about the presidents, ex-presidents, I talk about these people, there are times actually we had the chance to talk to them very much in detail, no? Very much in detail. So hindi tayo nagsasalita out of nowhere, no? So again, you can just go to YouTube, just type Hey Darian, Gloria Arroyo, interview, lalabas yan. So you can see, we discussed extensively a lot of issues. This was live broadcasted. And one of the things we discussed is also her foreign policy. Now, ang basa ko kay President Arroyo is that especially in her earlier years, she really tried to move on multiple fronts, not too different from Marcos Sr. or for that matter even Ramos, no? Because on one hand, she tried to be a reliable ally for the United States, especially dun sa global war on terror, right? In fact, during President Arroyo's time, the Philippines became a major non-NATO ally. That's the technical or formal official term they use for the Philippines. Major non-NATO ally to the U.S., particularly dun sa global war on terror. We revised our mutual defense treaty and alliance to make it more relevant, mga kameta, dun sa mga new and emerging security threats, non-traditional security threats, terrorism threats, dealing with Abu Sayyaf, and all of the antecedents of ISIS or Daesh, no? Now, if you look at Arroyo, at least in the first years to mid-2000s, no? Because most of the people, when you talk about Arroyo administration, Arroyo foreign policy, ang maalala nila mga kameta is yung towards the end, yung NBNZT scandal, all of that, right? And especially after 2007 midterm elections and how things went kind of crazy there. But you have to remember that in the early 2000s and all the way to 2006 or so, Arroyo was trying to move on multiple fronts simultaneously, no? And quite deftly. So, on one hand, yes, she doubled down and upgraded the alliance with the United States. There was tension with the US dahil dun sa kanyang pag-withdraw ng Filipino troops from Iraq, dun sa coalition of kunyari willing pa rin mga na-pressured na countries ni Bush para lang sumali dun sa kalokohan nilang giyera sa Iraq. I mean, worse than kalokohan, ang dami namatay daw sa giyera na yan. But it's not like the relationship with the US broke down, no, during Arroyo era. It was tense, but it did not break down. And in fact, there was still significant foreign military financing and support coming for the Philippines during the Arroyo era, no. Not to mention, there was a successful pressure on her administration to make sure na streamline yung macroeconomic stability, yung macroeconomic conditions natin. So, a lot of good things that happened under Aquino, they didn't come out of nowhere. No, actually, some of them, the foundations were laid down during Arroyo time. Some infrastructure projects for sure, but also yung cutting down of fiscal deficit. And again, that's it. The reality is messy. It's not like evil versus good. That's the problem with politics, especially populists. They make it evil versus good, but the reality is much more complicated. But anyway, the alliance with the U.S. was not totally in trouble. In fact, in 2016, 2006, 2005. If you read the WikiLeaks cable, I had to do that because I had to write a volume about what the WikiLeaks reveal about American empire's policies in Southeast Asia. Actually, even the Americans were impressed with Arroyo and how she was reaching also to China while maintaining the alliance with the United States. Remember yung visit niya to China and then pagbisita na Wenjiabao to the Philippines. I think this is 2005 or 2006. So a lot of exchanges was happening. And back then, China was still not seen as a major threat to the Philippines. It was rising economic power, peaceful rise supposedly. Hu Jintao was not as aggressive or whiplash style as Xi Jinping, at least also the early phase of Hu Jintao. But what's interesting is that Arroyo also tried to push for strong cooperation with fellow ASEAN countries, including Vietnam. So one of the things that she pushed for was the joint maritime seismic undertaking, a joint exploration deal that she wanted to push with Vietnam and China. Now, kung napanood yung mga kameta, sorry, may discount na lumabas. Okay, kung napanood yung mga kameta, yung interview namin with si Teddy Casino, etc., we discussed how actually the JMSU was unconstitutional and it very much undermined our national interest. Now, as I said, I'm not also happy with the JMSU in terms of its structure, in terms of its implications, in terms of its circumstances. But you could also see that Arroyo was trying to keep everything on an even keel, keep relations strong with the US, but not dependent on the US, reach out to China, but not just only to China, but keep the US still there. At the same time, also reaching out to Vietnam with the JMSU deal. So all of these things were important. So really the China, Vietnam, Philippines triangle is really an Arroyo kind of legacy. Also mga kameta, itong U.S. China, Philippines strategic triangle, we also saw a lot of big things happening right and left mga kameta. A lot of things happening right and left mga kameta pagdating sa Arroyo administration. So what I could say is that the Arroyo era foreign policy legacy is very much with us, and it's a mixed bag. No, I mean it's not a kind of all bad or all good. And at the same time, there are times naman na hindi rin kasalanan ng Pilipinas because we were also adjusting to what the other powers were doing. But what I would argue is that the first, at least embers of potential strategic cooperation between Vietnam and the Philippines, you can really see that under Arroyo because of JMSU. Again, I'm not for JMSU, but I'm saying, but that was the anchor, no? Except of course, it was really under the Aquino era that we see this Philippine-Vietnam relationship reaching the next level and then being undermined by Duterte. Let's just discuss that in a separate vlog, mga kameta. But yun nga inisip ko na the more you think about it, that almost decade in power by Arroyo, it was like a 50 shades of policy mistakes and also gains, or underappreciated gains, and also underappreciated risks and problems, no? And since then, we're still living with that legacy. And I think that's why it's very important to understand at balikan talaga yung legacy ni Arroyo. And the fact that she's around, I don't know, she's still trying to, be around politically, etc. Maybe she wants her form of, she wants to feel vindicated. She feels that history was unkind to her. I don't know. We can discuss that. But my point is there are a lot of things about our current state of affairs that cannot be understood kung hindi mo tinignan ng mabuti yung mga ginawa ni Arroyo, yung mga half na ginawa niya, yung mga hindi niya nagawa. So that decade was very crucial, mga kameta. That decade was very crucial. A lot of our relationship with China, Vietnam, US, these countries, roots of that you can find actually with President Arroyo, no? And President Arroyo, of course, is very, very influential in a sense that both Duterte and Marcos actively praised her and tried to even draw on her, except of course itong latest na konting hinduan na nangyari. And in the case of President Aquino, he tried to make his foreign policy the anti-Arroyo, right? So in that sense, he's also very much shaped by the Arroyo legacy. But even having said that, during his first year, President Aquino, the late President Aquino, God bless his soul, he tried to also reach out to China and reason with China. For instance, he did not go to the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony for Chinese Liu Xiaobo, dissident back then, and a lot of people were like disappointed with that. He tried to extend the olive branch to China in 2010, 2011, etc. But really, things went downhill from 2012 onwards. No, so that's what I'm saying. The Arroyo legacy is very, very important, mga kameta. And again, to better understand where I'm coming from, look at kindly check yung interview ko with former President Arroyo a few years earlier. She was Speaker of the House back, this is 2018, I think, 2019. No? So please kindly check yung interview namin. And balikan natin itong issue na to because I feel this Philippine, Vietnam, China, US, all of these relationships, in one way or another, I'll have to start with Arroyo. And then from there, we'll discuss more. Now, what I want to also discuss is there are a lot of these people, especially pro-Tatay people or pro-China people there, who try to portray Vietnam as the threat to the Philippines. The Vietnamese, yes, they took some of the islands that the Philippines was claiming or occupying back in the day, given na yan. But we don't see, since the end of Cold War, any direct threat by Vietnam militaries to the Philippines in one way or another. And we'll discuss that further later on. And by the way, dun sa mga henyo dyan, wag niyo i-compare yung reclamation ng China sa ginagawa ng Vietnam. Yes, Vietnam has been doing some reclamation, etc. That's true. But it's like NBA versus PBA level. And levels matter. So drawing a false equivalence between the two of them, kasama dyan, yung isang mga natin dyan, yung mga isang pro-tatay na senador dyan. Oh, alam niyo na yan. Connect the dots, mga kameta. Okay. Anyways, thank you very much, mga kameta. Balikan natin itong topic na ito soon. Salamat dito sa mga supporters natin dyan. Yan, kay Ma'am Jocelyn, kay Sir Sarson, kay Royce Samontanes, kay Andre Llanes, kay Ma Victoria. Thank you very much sa lahat ng mga nagko-comment dito. Ayan, pinag-usapan pa. Yeah, check nyo rin yung mga natin, yung mga WikiLeaks analysis natin. Mahanap nyo rin yan. Na-analyze po natin mga yan. Ayan. Thank you very much din dito sa mga kaibigan natin sa Facebook, Pace na, hindi na Face. Alright, kay Ellen Olonan, kay Mia Fresnida, thank you very much. Kay Marisa Mandal, yes, that's true. If Mia Fresnida, a lot of people remember the Hello Garcia, a lot of people remember the NBNZT, but a lot of other things were also happening that decade, right? With huge geopolitical implications and implications for our foreign policy, no? Salamat din kay Christy Aguilar, kay Noemi Tablate, kay Norman Plete, Naimbag ng Rabi din Kapsat, thank you very much kay Brav Pitt, yan, Madrigal Heya, yan, lahat naman na nanonood sa atin. Balita ko si, pangalan nyo, balita ko si, what's his name? Si Christian Esguerra, nag-everyday na rin siya, wow, talaga, at si Christian Esguerra ay nag-live na rin, so I'm good to see, we're all picking up things from each other, inspiration, etc. I'm not claiming he got it from me, but I'm glad to see that he's coming out more and more. Kasi yun nga, mga kameta, kailangan ng spontaneous production talaga. I mean, of course, mga kameta, meron tayong, ngayon, thank God, meron tayong sariling show, mainstream media show, etc. So yun, of course, may process yan. But if you're gonna do social media, really my advice, mga kameta, is to be as spontaneous, relatable, as possible. Don't overdo it. Chill lang. So I'm glad that Christian Esguerra, a lot of sane people out there, a lot of good people out there, a lot of patriotic people out there are getting more engaging, more active. Kasi yung mga vloggers na iba, alam niyo na mga yan, nako, everyday 3, 4, 5 yung mga hanash ng mga yan, yung mga marites ng mga yan. Kaya ewan ko talaga sa mga yan. Alright? So thank you very much again, mga kameta, and God bless, and talk to you soon.